The room looked exactly as it had for decades. Desk beneath the window, filing cabinet in the corner, bookshelf along the wall. But Bennett was seeing it with new eyes, eyes that had been trained to read crime scenes, to understand the stories that spaces told about the violence they had witnessed. The hardwood floor was beautiful, golden oak that matched the rest of the house. But here and there, if you knew what to look for, you could see the faint outlines where something else had been installed and later removed. Rectangular shapes, each about 3 feet by 6 feet, arranged in a precise pattern. Bennett knelt in the center of the room, his hands flat against the floor. The wood was smooth and perfectly finished, but when he closed his eyes and pressed his palms down, he could feel something else, a texture that wasn't quite right, a slight give in the boards that suggested something had soaked through and dried there long ago. The silence in the room was different from the silence elsewhere in the house. It felt full, saturated with sounds that had happened here decades ago, but somehow hadn't quite faded. Bennett found himself holding his breath, as though afraid to disturb something that was still trying to speak. A memory surfaced. Not visual, but kinesthetic. A body memory of being small, frightened, and pressed against something soft. Hiding. He'd been hiding, watching through a crack in a door as 2 men struggled in this room. Watching as his mother tried to intervene and was struck down. Watching as the larger man, Cliff, his biological father, raised something heavy above his head and brought it down on the woman Bennett had called Mama. Watching as Harold, younger then and desperate, fought back with the kind of violence that comes from love and terror combined. The sound of impact, wet and final. The sound of a body hitting the floor. The sound of mats being displaced and wooden boards creaking under the weight of falling men. And then silence. The kind of silence that wasn't just absence of sound, but presence of ending. Bennett opened his eyes and found himself staring at a spot near the bookshelf where the hardwood didn't quite match the rest of the floor, where boards had been replaced, refinished, made to look as though nothing had ever happened there. But something had happened there. 2 people had died in this room, their blood soaking into woven mats that had absorbed not just the physical evidence of violence, but somehow the emotional weight of it as well. The mats Harold had carefully removed and disposed of, all except one piece, one section, that he'd kept hidden in his wife's cedar chest like a talisman or a confession. Bennett stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He understood now why this room had always felt wrong to him, why he'd avoided it even as a child. His unconscious mind had recognized it as the place where his world had ended and begun again, where the sound that had been cut from his life forever. But understanding brought no peace. If anything, the knowledge made the silence more oppressive, more full of things that could never be said or heard or forgiven. He turned to leave and found Catherine, standing in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. He never forgave himself, she said, and Bennett could read the words on her lips even as he saw them in her eyes. Harold carried that guilt for 32 years. He saved your life, Bennett. He saved you from a man who would have killed you too, eventually. But he never forgave himself for being too late to save your mother. Bennett nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He understood on an intellectual level why Harold had made the choices he'd made. The lies had been acts of love, attempts to give Bennett a normal childhood free from the trauma that had shattered his early years. But the cost of those lies had been enormous, not just for Bennett, but for Harold, who had spent 3 decades carrying the weight of truth alone. There's something else, Catherine said quietly, something Harold wanted me to give you if anything happened to him. She handed him an envelope, cream-colored paper with his his name written on the front in Harold's careful script. Bennett's hand shook as he opened it, revealing several pages of the same handwriting. Bennett, if you're reading this, then Catherine has told you the truth about what happened to your mother and father. I know this knowledge will be painful, and I'm sorry for the pain. I had hoped to find a way to tell you myself, but the words never came easily. You should know that your father, Cliff, wasn't always a violent man. When your mother first married him, he was charming and funny and full of dreams. But he had demons that he couldn't control, and those demons grew stronger as the years passed. By the end, he wasn't the man your mother had fallen in love with. I don't tell you this to make excuses for what he did or to ask you to forgive him. What he did was unforgivable. But you have his blood in you, Bennett, as well as your mother's, and I wanted you to know that there was good in him once. You don't have to carry his darkness. I also want you to know that your hearing loss may not be permanent. Dr. Peterson believed it was caused by trauma, which means it might be reversible with the right treatment. I never pursued this because I was afraid of what you might remember if your hearing returned. But you're an adult now, and the choice should be yours. I've tried to be a good father to you, but I've also tried to protect you from a truth I thought was too heavy for any child to bear. I hope you can forgive me for the deception. Everything I did because I loved you. There's one more thing. I kept a piece of the matting from that room, though I can't say exactly why. It's in your mother's cedar chest, along with some photographs and other papers that might help you understand who you were before that night changed everything. I thought about destroying it all, but something stopped me. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was the hope that someday you'd be strong enough to know the whole truth. Be careful with that piece of matting, Bennett. I know how this sounds, but there were nights when I thought I could hear voices coming from it. Your mother's voice sometimes. Cliff's, too. I told myself it was just my imagination. Just guilt manifesting in strange ways. But there were times when I wondered if some part of what happened that night got trapped in the fibers, the way blood had. I love you, son. I've always been proud of the man you became, in spite of everything. Harold. Bennett read the letter twice, his hands trembling by the time he reached the end. The idea that his hearing loss might be reversible was staggering enough, but Harold's mention of voices from the matting sent chills down his spine. It sounded like the ravings of a guilty conscience, but Bennett had spent years investigating unexplained phenomena for his crime reporting. He'd seen enough strange things to know that trauma sometimes left marks that went beyond the physical. He looked up to find Catherine watching him with concerned eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked. Bennett considered the question seriously. Was he all right? He'd lost his father, learned that his entire life history was a carefully constructed lie, and discovered that he was the child of a murderer who had been killed by the man he'd thought was his father. On top of that, he was apparently in possession of a piece of flooring that his adoptive father believed to be haunted. "No," he said finally. "I'm not all right, but I will be." Catherine nodded as though this answer satisfied her. "What will you do now?" Bennett wasn't sure. Return to San Francisco, presumably. Continue his work writing about other people's tragedies while trying to process his own. Maybe look into the possibility of regaining his hearing, though the prospect terrified him. His deafness had been his identity for so long that he couldn't imagine who he might be without it. But first, there was something he needed to do. "I need to go back to the attic," he told Catherine. "There's something I need to see again." She nodded, though her expression was troubled. "I'll be downstairs if you need me." The climb to the attic felt longer this time. Each step weighted with purpose and dread. The cedar chest sat where he'd left it, its contents scattered around it like evidence at a crime scene.